Hey Mama, welcome to the Mrs. Mummy PhD podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Gibbs, wife, mama of 3, and doctor of the PhD kind. On this podcast, we talk honestly about high achievement, burnout, and what it looks like to lead well across home, work, and self. So if you're an ambitious mother scholar who's quietly exhausted by the pace you've been keeping and starting to realize that survival isn't the same as success, this podcast is for you. Mrs. Mummy PhD began during my own PhD journey as a wife and mama. Today, as a postdoctoral scholarly mama working across 2 leadership roles, this work has evolved. It's no longer just about finishing the PhD well, it's about creating sustainable ways of learning, leading, and living at any stage of your journey without losing yourself in the process. If you are ready to move from survival to restoration, you're in the right place. Let's begin. These are our journeys of becoming. Welcome back to the Mrs. Mummy PhD podcast. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. And today is so special because I have with me today on the podcast a very special guest. Her name is Dr. Katy Peplin. She is a PhD in screen arts and cultures from the University of Michigan. She's also a wife and a mama and a cat lover as well, who also loves to be outside. If she's not outside in her garden, she's in a pool or hiking or something outdoors. So Katy is also the creative mind behind Thrive PhD, which is an online community that supports scholars to thrive in their work and also to make the world a better place by being better humans. So I am so happy to have you, Katy. Would you like to introduce yourself? Maybe share something fun about yourself for my lovely listeners.
I would be happy. So I'm Katy Peplin. I founded and run Thrive PhD. I am mom to a glorious, chaotic 2-year-old who arrived February 2024. So I am still adjusting. The business existed before he arrived and is existing, hopefully, after. But this is that feels a little bit more day-to-day than I might be comfortable with. But for the fun thing about me is that I sit in this work. This is my joint office, playroom, guest room. So I always kind of laugh because there is a day bed behind me. And every so often I find a cat that's sleeping back there, or a collection of very carefully placed Hot Wheels cars, because that's the era that we're in, or laundry that's made it up. And I think that it's just this really beautiful visual of what my life is right now.
I love that.
The background of my work and the space that I live in and the space that houses my guests and the space that my son uses. It all feels very mixed together.
Oh my goodness, that's a really lovely metaphor for what we will probably talk about today, blending these various parts of ourselves. We hadn't even planned that, and that just kind of really sat really well at the beginning of the episode to set the tone for what we're going to be talking about. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So one of the things I wanted to start with in our chat today was about the PhD journey. And you describe your PhD as being sort of like a crucible. And that word says a lot. It really implies this visual of heat and pressure and transformation. And so my question to you is, what was actually being refined within yourself during that process of doing your PhD? And do you think that you could have gotten there any other way?
Ooh, it's such a good question. So I went straight through in school. So I got my undergraduate and I went right into my master's, partially because there was a global economic collapse and it was better to go to grad school than it was to be on the job market. And then I went right into the PhD. And so I was in school continuously for the first 28 years of my life, just a really long period. And the PhD was the I watched other friends go through similar transformations in leaving first jobs, sometimes even leaving marriages, leaving big relationships. I just happened to do it being really committed to academia and all that it stood for in terms of values and goals and ways of being and ways of living. And then realizing that it didn't fit me in the way that I wanted it to necessarily. So I came back to my undergraduate institution to do my PhD, which in a lot of ways was a really good personal decision because my family was located there and my boyfriend and now husband was there. We had been long distance during our masters, and on paper, everything was going in the exact right way that I planned it. The publications were out on time, the grades were there, the move worked out. And then all of the sudden, I remember right around my exams, so like just about halfway through the process, there were like kind of a sequence of things that happened in the department that just made me realize that I hadn't even let myself think about what would have happened if I didn't become a professor. Like if I didn't do the whole thing all the way full out. It just was like, well, what if you did something else? And that was so destabilizing in so many ways because I'd never considered what my values were. I just always did they set the bar and I hit it. And so if they said publish twice a year, I published twice a year. If they said, aim for these journals, teach these classes, I did those things. And then I was like, oh, I'm allowed to decide if I really want to do this or not. And halfway through, I realized that I was chronically ill. I was diagnosed with endometriosis during my master's program. And one thing that they told me when I was like 22 and getting this diagnosis was that if I wanted to have a family, and if I wanted to physically and literally carry a pregnancy, that I needed to do that as soon as possible because I had a lot of mitigating factors with my fertility. And so this was this kind of ticking clock that as it got louder, I realized that there was no easy solution in that ecosystem for me. And I just remember this moment of asking an advisor. I was like, okay, this is something that I'm starting to think about. I just got married. We're having these conversations as a family. What would you recommend that I do to start getting ready for this if this thing were to happen, in the next 6 months or 8 months? And she said, don't you dare let anyone hear you ask that question. She was not incorrect. When people learned that that was something that I was valuing or working towards, they definitely saw me differently. But it also was just this real clear values misalignment that I was like, okay, multiple things are important to me. My professional goals are important to me, but this goal of having a family is really important to me too. And if it's not going to build in the flexibility for me to be able to do this, then I need to start making choices to open up that space myself. So I think that I would have had that same revelation about defining for myself what these things would look like in my mid-20s anyway, because I certainly saw a lot of my colleagues and friends and peers and stuff do it. But there was something that made it really difficult because I'd never had any other experiences. I'd never had a job. I'd never really, that wasn't, like a full-time job outside of it. So it was all I'd known professionally, and to leave it was really, really scary.
That's really interesting because my next question actually related to expectations. And you started off talking about this trajectory that was kind of set for you, and without you even realizing, you were kind of just following along on that trajectory. And so I'm just wondering and curious about expectations and whether they were expectations that you had to just let go of. You talked about the fact that you started to question whether this actually really aligned with your values. And so what sort of expectations did you have to shift for yourself?
There was an expectation. I was at an R1 school, which is a classification in the US that it's the highest level of kind of research production. So
yeah, It's like our version of Russell Group.
Yeah. Yeah. So everyone around me was very focused. And the first kind of chink in the armor was I loved teaching. I couldn't get enough learning about it. I couldn't take enough workshops about it. I couldn't read enough about it. I loved being with my students. I was winning awards and like doing research and really like adding value to the institution. Students loved my classes. They were doing better in other classes because they'd done such great work with me. And I remember feeling so disoriented because I was a first generation student. So like none of my parents had gone to like university, but like lived at home or done like associate's degrees. Nobody had ever kind of done the whole academia thing with a capital A. And so I just remember calling my dad and being like, I'm so frustrated because they keep telling me how valuable this work that I'm doing is, that I'm teaching. And then they're also telling me I'm not meeting expectations. So, like, which is it? And he was like, well, he was like, there's going to be a lot of jobs where the people will tell you that they're glad for you to pick up all of these extra jobs and work, and they'll never pay you more for it. They'll never adjust what they're expecting. It's always going to be a bonus. And so you might get a hearty handshake or you might get a pat on the back, but it's never going to move you forward. So you need to pay attention to what the measurable expectations are, which is really great advice, but it really helped me see that there were expectations I was hitting for myself, and then there were the expectations that they had. And because culturally, everyone was sacrificing everything for the expectations. There wasn't a lot of public, I'm not available on Friday nights to do this thing, or this won't be done for Monday. People were adjusting to meet the expectation rather than the other way around. And so I had to eventually let go of what was at the time just like completely soul shaking. I had to let people down. Like people had to be disappointed in me. People had to disagree, sometimes publicly, with the choices that I was making. And I had to reckon with the consequences of that. I am open about this with some of my clients, but I'm not sure I've ever talked about it publicly, and I'm happy to. But the reason I don't have a postdoc or a faculty degree is that in the last year of my PhD, my husband lost his job and ended up moving a couple of states away to take a new job. And obviously, that was stressful for us as a family. I was starting to really realize that having a pregnancy and sort of successfully conceiving was going to be much less straightforward than I thought it was. So I was grieving every 28 days, trying to finish, working 2 jobs, trying to do all of these things. And then my husband lost his job. And I remember saying to my advisor, we need to adjust my job search strategy because I need to now have it so that I'll be within driving distance of where my husband's new job is. And she said, I won't write you letters if you're not willing to commit. Scholars would love, she's like, scholars deserve people who will give everything for the job. So like if you're not willing to move anywhere and go anywhere and be anything for the job, I'm not going to waste my time writing letters to support that. And at the time I was so overloaded that I couldn't push back on it. Like I didn't have any capacity to get a second opinion. But the reality was that if my chair wasn't going to write me letters, I didn't have a shot on the job market. So I don't regret in any way choosing my family and choosing the quality of life that I wanted. But it wasn't the kind of gentle, that expectation had a consequence when I didn't meet it. And it was a really brutal lesson that I still am unpacking. It still occurs to me every so often that one person's expectation shaped my career in ways that I had some, but not a lot of control over.
I think very few careers, when you think about the pressures and people talk about being burnt out and it's too much. And I think, yes, that does happen. But I think with academic careers, there's also this internal identity pressure that you kind of deal with. And when you've got these really strong expectations and people in very powerful positions that can really influence the direction of your career, you internalize that so much that it then becomes like, I'm not just disappointing those people, but I'm actually feeling like I'm disappointing myself.
Right.
If I don't follow through with the expectations. So I can imagine that was really tough for you and your dad had great advice, but it was probably still quite a difficult decision to make and difficult reality to face afterward, the consequences of that decision.
Yeah, it's this year it's been 10 years since I defended my dissertation, and it occurred to me the other day that I still haven't framed and hung my diploma. Like I can see it right there on the shelf. And I use my title, I use my research, I certainly use everything I learned and more in my day-to-day professional life. But there is a grief in leaving behind this identity that I had shaped everything in order to be. And I left it and I chose to leave it, but my choices were constrained. And so the grief hits differently than it did, but it still comes back every now and then. And there's not much to do except um, sit with it and let it make me more open and aware of the ways that these identities carry more power than a title, carry more power than any one job or any one role. Um, and so it's made me so sensitive to these decisions when my clients have to make them because um, I've certainly made them myself.
You get it. Yeah.
More than most, maybe.
So you mentioned being first gen. I relate to that. I'm also first gen. In fact, I'm the first person in my family to go to any university of any kind for any kind of degree. So I relate to that. And I just wonder, being first gen, navigating a world that, there are some unwritten rules and there's the assumption that you are aware of those unwritten rules. How did that experience being in academia shape the kind of support that you now build for people who are on that journey?
The anecdote that I use most of the time is that I remember coming home for my very first day of PhD orientation. So at this point, I'd been through a master's degree. I wasn't new. I wasn't brand new. And I remember going home that day and Googling what is tenure and spending 2 or 3 hours. Like I knew it was a promotion, but I didn't know how you got it or like what you did or what it meant at different places. I did Googling what is tenure. And in some ways, that ability to be like, I don't know about this thing, I'm going to learn it is the very basis of my business because I encountered things that I didn't know every day. How does this work? What is a dean? What is a provost? Like, where does this money come from? How do they decide who gets what teaching assignment? I just was insatiably curious because I didn't know how the system worked. And the more I learned about how it worked, the more easily I was able to move through it because there were all of these unspoken things that other people just seemed to know and I didn't know. And I worked really hard to learn them. And the thing that I think about all of the time with clients and what I'm teaching is that there are so few places that make it clear that everybody in the system is learning the system as they go. In part because the system is changing, but in part because a lot of these things you can only really navigate experientially. Your chair is going to be different from somebody else's chair. The politics here are going to be a little bit different. And so, yes, I was at, in some ways, a disadvantage because I didn't know. But in other ways, I wasn't as far behind as other people thought. And so I feel like one of the things that I try really hard to do in my work with clients is be like, yes, you might be missing certain areas of strategic knowledge or kind of foundational knowledge or organizational knowledge, but what you bring is also an asset. And it changes the ways you operate in those systems. And if, as many of us think, these systems could change to be more inclusive and more equitable, then your presence in them deserves places where you can feel like what you bring to the table is an asset and it deserves to be valued and protected. And so, yes, like I want to help people understand what tenure is, but I also want them to feel like there are spaces where they can think that I'm going to change the system as much as it's going to change me, and we're both going to be better for it.
I love that. And I love the idea of spaces where people feel that they belong and they deserve to be there and they don't feel like an outsider. They don't feel like an imposter. And so I'm just wondering whether there were moments for yourself on your own journey as a first gen scholar where you felt you needed to choose between that sense of belonging in academia and your own kind of identity and experience and lived experience of being a first gen scholar.
There was a moment. So my department was pretty small. They accepted 2 people a year. There were only maybe 3 or 4 classes ahead of me. The program was relatively new. And so by the time it came for me to defend, there was some convention around how a defense would look like or how it would look, but it wasn't set in stone or like it wasn't in the handbook. And it didn't occur to me in any way to not invite my parents to be at my defense. And so when my parents showed up on the morning of my defense, all of the faculty members that were assembled were shocked. Why are your parents here? How are they here? And I was like, well, you said it was open to the public and they're the most important parts of my public. And so of course my parents are going to be here. And at that point, I was secure enough. I was on my way out that I was like, listen, my parents are coming and you can fail me if you want to, but like, this is what's going to be. And I remember having somebody say it was so meaningful to have your parents in the audience. And I was like, thank you, because I wouldn't have done it without them. And they're part of the ecosystem that created this work as much as, in some ways as you are. And, they deserve to. And the further I got in the program, the more I realized the difference between disrupting the norm and facing a consequence for breaking the norm. There were things that were survivable. There were things that were even benefits for me not following lockstep what other people were doing. And like I've shared in other places, there were times where I did step out and there were consequences. But the more I opened up space by sticking my toe outside of the lane a little bit because of my identity and sort of how I had. And I knew that, at the end of the day, my husband had a job. So if I didn't get one right away, we would still be able to make grocery money. I had a little bit more space to take on some of that risk that some of my other colleagues didn't. And I had fewer qualms at the end about disrupting some of those things.
How lovely. In the UK, we don't have public defense situations that.
Totally different.
And it's totally different. But I would have loved if my dad or my mom could have been a part of that. I mean, they couldn't come to the graduation either, but my husband and kids were there, and that felt so special to have them because they were very much a part of that journey. And so, I could see why you'd want your parents to be there. I'm glad you pushed back on that.
Yeah. And now people's parents do come to their defenses. So, um,
Love that.
um,
Love that.
yeah. And it's certainly not. Yeah. It was a beautiful part of a day that was high pressure. And it felt nice to have more parts of me there than just this 300-page behemoth I had written.
Yeah, that must have been really nice for your dad as well, having the conversations with you about the challenges and things and navigating that with you and then being there at the end. That must have been really nice for him.
For both my mom and my dad, they were so critical and and that was the benefit of doing my PhD in a place where my family also was that I would work all week and then I would come home and I would have dinner with my husband, and he wasn't an academic and he had a job, and I would go to pierogi day with my family and I would hang out with my cousins, and I had some real spatial and temporal links to the other parts, which made it easier to keep hold of them in a way that like my colleagues that were, 3,000 miles away from home was harder for sure.
For sure. Yeah, I can definitely relate to navigating that without family nearby. It's really hard. I mean, thankfully, obviously I had my husband, but our family is abroad. And so it's a different experience when you haven't got that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about wellness, because I know this is something that's really important to you as well. So you came face to face with your mental health and chronic illness you mentioned during your PhD. How do you help others navigate the challenge of practicing and prioritizing their wellness as opposed to just performing it?
Oh, it's a daily humbling experience because I think it's one of the things that's changed the most since I've become a parent. But uh, the the reality of it when I was a PhD student was that had we looking back, I can see how all of us had limits on our capacity. No one was reading 20 hours a day. Nobody was writing 7 days a week. I wasn't the only one. But I had a very unforgiving off switch that flipped off. And I would have fatigue. I would have brain fog. I would have back pain that meant I couldn't sit in my chair. And it made it so that in some ways it was easier because it wasn't a choice. I wasn't going to be able to overcome that with planning. There was no special to-do list hack that was going to that was going to mitigate that. I had to accept the reality at some point. But the problem and the sort of like difference between performing it and living it now is that the life my brain and heart can imagine for myself is not always the one that my physical body has capacity for. And the difference now, and I'm still refining it, and I probably will be forever, is that if it's finite, and it is for all of us, but for me, I had to do it a little bit earlier. If it's finite, you have to make choices. And either you're consciously making them or you're unconsciously making them. And the thing that I try really hard to surface for clients is like, you're going to make this choice either way. You're going to either choose to go to bed at 10 o'clock or you're going to fall asleep on your couch at 11. You're going to choose it either way. So let's try as hard as we can to come back to this anchor of doing it on purpose. If you're going to rest on purpose. Even if it's only for 10 minutes, even if it's only for the length of the time that it takes you to make dinner, even if it's only 3 or 4 nights a week that you make that bedtime, like do it on purpose. But if you're going to work, do it on purpose too. And that definition of kind of on purpose is the kind of thing that even when I drift, I try to come back to it. Because like all of us, we get caught up and I have many competing priorities. And so I have to come down and be like, okay, like you've been scrolling on your phone for 20 minutes. Would you like to rest on purpose? And is it the most restful thing for you to be watching clips of a podcast that you've already watched? No. Like, would it be more restful for you to take a shower? Would it be more restful for you to like get get on top of your dishes or like clean out your inbox? And that part, that's the difference between performing it. Because like I'm sure that people, if you zoomed me over my shoulder over the course of the day, I'm sure it looks like I'm resting at certain points. But the determination of like the actively choosing it is what makes it hit a little bit different.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of like being super, super intentional about both the rest and the work. Because, like you said, whether you choose it or not, you're either going to fall into it, which nobody wants, or you are going to be intentional about it. So, why not be intentional about it? And not just the rest, but actually the work too, because ultimately you've got to do that work. But if you can be intentional about it, if you can be intentional about the rest, that can enable you to perform that work so much better, show up for that work so much
Yeah.
better.
Yeah. And that I don't ever mean to sound like I have this on lockdown. There are certainly moments that I'm drifting, but I think about I was a very devoted yoga practitioner for a very long time. And I remember my teacher always used to say that like the goal is never to not think. You know what I mean? The goal is never to like keep your mind completely present. She was like, if you can notice 100 times an hour the times that you've been distracted, that's the work, that's the practice. Like that's what you're meant to be doing. And I catch myself all of the time, but I come back and like I have that center point that I come back to. And that that makes a difference whether it's going to bed on time or like putting my phone in the other room because I am faster at responding to emails when I'm also not scrolling on Instagram at the same time.
Definitely. So you kind of talked about what wellness looks like in practice for you, which is amazing. But what has helped you to shift your thinking around what it means to be productive? Like, what is your relationship with productivity?
um I I have I have a colleague, Dr. Kate Henry, who really teaches and practices what she calls slow productivity. Uh, in terms of just very intentional and very grounded and within her capacity and within her bounds. And I think of my productivity a lot more like a wave. In the beginning of some of these journeys, I would push and I was on the mountaintop sometimes. Like, and I would get through huge amounts of work and I would be so focused and I would be, and like looking back, of course I was neurodivergent and like, of course I had some of these kind of brain chemistry things going on, but there were real moments of wow, this feels good. This feels aligned. This felt on purpose. And like, I got so much work done.
Yeah.
And I also would crash hard after those. And my goal with productivity right now is to make it so that the peaks aren't so high that they drain everything out of me and I don't have choices afterwards. And the lows are not so low that I can't find my way out of them. But I will probably never be a person who does the same amount of work at the same time of day every single day. I wasn't that way before I was a parent, and I'm certainly not that way now. And so I've learned that in this season, at least, there are moments that like I kind of have to plan for now, and I kind of have to be ready for them. But when they hit, they hit. And then I know there's going to be a dip afterwards. And that dip isn't a problem. And the peak of the wave isn't a problem. but I can support it. I can build architecture, so to speak, that accounts for waves.
Ultimately, whether that's a PhD journey or a post PhD journey, or whether that's being child free or whether that's as a parent, I think we all go through ebbs and flows, and we all have our little rhythms. There are times, that productivity can be exceptionally high and the output is just flowing, and you get into that flow state so quickly and produce amazing amounts of work. And then there are other times where you just need to be a bit more gentle with yourself. And that is okay. Nobody's expecting, we're not machines. We're not, we're not robots. We're not expected to perform at the same pace all the time. And I think sometimes we forget that. We forget that we are human, that we have peaks and troughs.
Yeah.
And it's okay to have peaks and troughs. And so for the mama listening to this who is feeling in one of the troughs and thinking, oh my goodness, maybe I'm not cut out for this, that is so normal. We need to normalize that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the lesson that I've really had to learn is that just because you did it in a peak doesn't mean that's the new baseline. And
exactly.
That was the really heavy thing that I was carrying. I was like, well, I did it on Tuesday, so I should be able to do it at least 3 or 4 more times this week. And the baseline of the wave is somewhere in the middle. And so the average of those days is a little bit more stable. But just because I did it on Tuesday doesn't mean that it's going to be available the next day. And that's not a symptom of anything. That's just the way a wave works.
Just life. We love to compare not just ourselves with others, but compare ourselves with our past selves, our future selves, or selves last week, or selves last month, where context might have been so different. And we have the same expectation, but we ignore the contextual influences on why maybe that isn't possible in this season. And particularly when you've got kids, there's so many peaks and troughs with that alone, and your energy levels are up and down and all over the place. And so, we can't expect that just because we've done it before, like you said, that's the new standard for us to perform at. I remember a couple of years back, there have been times where I have, by just the situation, had to do something quite last minute. And I remember I was writing a grant application, and usually I would give myself a good chunk of time, but by the time I had found out about this application, it was 6 weeks to the deadline. And this was on top of my work. This was not it wasn't the only thing I was focusing on. I was doing loads of other things and working. I'd just actually gone to an international conference and came back, and I wasn't really 100%. I picked up some bug on the way, and it was just so many things going on. And I remember pushing myself so hard, to meet that deadline and to get that application in. And for some reason, I seem to have thought that, like you said, that was the new expectation, that I could, do this in this short space of time. I ended up not getting the award. And I think that was the kind of reminder for me that this may work for other people, but this is not your rhythm. This is not how it works for you. And so it was a reminder, it was a really timely reminder of being gentle with myself, setting the expectation. Yes, there are some seasons where it may be possible to put that application together in a short space of time and nail it and get that award. And there are other times where that just doesn't happen, and that's fine. And so I had to remind myself that that isn't your new baseline, that isn't your new standard, and don't have those expectations so high that you end up crashing into a trough because you push yourself too far.
Yeah. And there's something so beautiful in the way that you're putting that sense that just because you can do it doesn't mean that it's the best configuration of your resources and your time and your values. It's a solution, but it might not be the one that's the most robust long term.
Yeah.
And that's
And definitely not the most sustainable.
yeah, definitely not. And sustainability hits differently when there are other people. The consequences are different. Like if I push it so hard after bedtime that I am dragging in the morning and I'm snapping at breakfast and the lunch is half-assed and there's knock-on effects. And everyone in my life is going to survive if I'm a little bit cranky at breakfast, and everyone is going to be okay if the lunch isn't beautiful and, perfect, Teddy Grahams works sometimes in a pinch. But that is data that, like, yes, it's solved for this thing. I did get it done, but at what do I want to keep using that solution? Or is that a specific tool in a specific place that, like, wasn't as effective as I wanted it to be?
It's like, having 3 sons who love playing games and things. Sometimes you think, sometimes you have like these cars or little toys that have got like a turbo button, or even something, not even the toys, even like recently, actually, I was thinking about this. We've got a cordless Hoover, like a cordless vacuum cleaner, I think you would say. And it's got this turbo button and you can kind of like go on blast. And recently I was hoovering and I'm like, you know what? I just really want the really powerful suction because I just want to get this done quickly and just, put on the turbo blast. But of course it's cordless. There's only a limited amount of power within it. And within what would have normally given me maybe about 30 minutes of hoovering, gave me like 5 minutes on turbo blast. And after 5 minutes, the thing just powered off. And I'm like, but I'm nowhere near finished. The job is not done. What is happening? And so it just reminds me, that's not sustainable to continue functioning on turbo blast.
No.
And so there are times where you may be able to turn that on given the contextual conditions, but there's times where you just need to go on ordinary. Go with the ordinary and just get it done gently and at a pace that works for you. And that's okay. You mentioned about the fact that when you do go on this like turbo blast or like push yourself a bit too hard, and there are consequences to that, right? Because we've got those multiple priorities. So one of the things that you also said before that really stuck with me, you said that there's so much support for putting the PhD first, the scholarly work first, but so little space to talk about having those multiple priorities and actually juggling lots of things at once. What does it cost people, in your opinion, when they flatten everything else in their life to make their PhD or their scholarly work the priority?
I often think about it like a snooze button on an alarm clock. That it's a short-term solution to an acute problem that may that will arrive at any point. And now I've been in this role and supporting scholars for almost 10 years now. And I've had the privilege and the honor to watch people. Sometimes it's from like the PhD application process all the way through like tenure review. And the alarm, you do need to get out of bed eventually in terms of that alarm. And you can snooze it a little bit to get the dissertation in, to get the job. And there will be continual calls to keep snoozing it. Once I get through my exams, once this chapter is done, once I get the job, once I do this other thing, there's always a reason to press the snooze button that is compelling.
Yeah.
But eventually the alarm has to ring. And it was so devastating for me to have to reckon with the idea that my career as a scholar in that traditional way was ending. But having that reckoning at 28 I had more options. I had more runway than some of my friends who are doing it at 45 or 50 or sometimes even later. And they're like, I kept pushing to the next milestone, thinking that the life would start after this. And I'm realizing now that the choice to start it was there all along.
Yeah.
And there's no, I believe really firmly in the idea that like there's no right or wrong way to get through it, and that there's lessons along the way for all of it, and that there's not. But what felt devastating to me at the time was somebody forced me out of that bed. And it wasn't my choice to get out of bed, but I did. And there was more left. And I think the thing that for academics specifically, and for anybody in like higher powered careers, but that and it's true in my parenthood journey too, where like as soon as he's sleeping through the night, as soon as he is down to one nap, as soon as he's in school, as soon as he's in like real school, as soon as he's potty trained, then I'll be able to do X, Y, and Z thing. And there's so little permission. There are so many there's no one stopping me and saying, "Hey, would you like to start working on your garden again? Hey, would you like to start writing your book? Like, would you like to prioritize a phone call with your best friend every week?" Like, and just because nobody's stopping me and asking me doesn't mean those choices aren't available to me. But it's really hard to remember that when you're tired and you just want to snooze. And so I, the, it's so less, it's, the startup cost is higher because there's nobody stopping me and asking me explicitly if I want to do these things. But the space almost always rearranges once you start to. It's kind of like cleaning out your closet where you're like, this task is so monumental, I don't think I'll ever be able to do it. And like, it is pretty brutal when all your stuff's out on the floor. And then you realize that like, there is an end goal to this. And like, you will be able to get what you want to get back in the closet. And it might not be everything. And you might get some new things, but there is an end goal if you decide that you want something different.
I love that. Really powerful. So much of the PhD journey is tangled up in identity. So we talked about this. Who you are as a scholar starts to become who you are as a person, and the two become one. How do you help people hold their academic identity loosely enough that it doesn't become the thing that defines them, but more importantly, doesn't become the thing that breaks them?
I spend a lot of time encouraging people to play. And I think that one of the things that being a professional academic or in the process of professionalizing in like a PhD program, it really, because all of our work is in our brains, there is very little. Like I come from a family of logistics and truck drivers, and there was a sense that like your job started and it ended, and then there was kind of more of a physical definition. And like I at times swear I was haunted by like historical figures, like just like thoughts occurring to me in the shower, and I couldn't control it. And I often try to give people lots of invitations to reconnect to the parts that got them interested in this in the first place. So just today I was on an office hours call encouraging people to read a little bit more widely, not just for the paper that they're doing, but like pick up a cool paper or read that fiction book or read, that piece of work that's not quite your area but seems really interesting to you, because that curiosity is what got you here in the first place, and connecting to that part of the identity and not the work products. So I often am like, okay, like what about the skills? Like you are writing. what about the skill of writing? Can we support? Can we play with? Can we make a little bit lighter so that you're not living and dying by your word count at the end of the day? And it's hard work because there's so much pressure. There's always something more to be doing. And in order to have that kind of playful attitude, you really do have to be in a nervous system place that's going to access it. Like if somebody had told me during some of my like dissertation powerhouse days to like stop and play and consider the broader field, I would not have reacted kindly or gently to that.
I'm telling you.
Yeah. But it was often the antidote to what I was feeling, which was this like, there's only one way to do it. There's only this one path. If I don't get this done today, then the rest of the month is going to be trash. And if you can find a way to balance it, it works a little bit better. It's not easy, but there's something really rich in connecting to the parts of it that got you here from the first place, whether that's the communities that you want to serve, the places that your research touches, the simple act of reading, the joy of a colored highlighter. Like all of those little touch points really can seem frivolous, but they do help connect you to like the materiality of it.
Yeah, that is so true. And actually, when I think about it, it was one of the benefits of being a parent on that journey for myself, because my kids really, gave me that space to be playful and to be creative. The children's books that I've written with them, that was during my PhD. And I just feel like sometimes what looks like a distraction is just necessary detachment from the work. And I think that when you can engage with that creativity and that curiosity, when you come back to your work, you're in such a different place.
Yeah, because the PhD is such creative work at its heart.
Yeah.
It's original knowledge, it's new knowledge, it's not rote tasks all the time. And you can't just produce that on a dime. You have to practice and you have to have space for it and you have to have ideas that have been percolating. But yeah, it's definitely, it doesn't always feel safe to do that. It doesn't always feel like welcome, but
definitely an investment worth making though in yourself to take that time. It feels like a burden at the time sometimes just to think about stepping away, but the return on investment is very much there. You do get that back. You do get that back. So talking about engaging in play and I mentioned about how being a parent during my PhD really that was to me quite an advantage because I got to do that all the time. But you are entering this new phase, as you said, in the last 2 years of being a scholar and being a scholar in a different way, but being a parent as well. How has becoming a parent changed how you think about your scholarly journey, or what do you think now about blending those parts of yourself?
Oh, what a beautiful question. What a emotional one in certain ways. Becoming a parent was not a straightforward process for me. It wasn't a fast or quick process. There were quite a few bumps along the road. There was a lot of loss. There was a lot. My ideal timeline was I used to daydream about turning down a glass of champagne at my defense because I was pregnant and revealing to everybody at that particular moment that like this next season was starting. And it was 8 more years after that I was able to kind of make that happen. And I really believe that you become a parent when it's time, like that there's something kind of otherworldly about that. But the real sticky point for me was that my life was in place. It wasn't a for sure thing that I was going to get pregnant. It wasn't a for sure thing that it was going to result in a living Earthside child. And so I didn't do a lot of prep work before because I was so nervous that it wouldn't happen. I didn't tell clients until like 2 months before it was going to happen. I hid my pregnancy on Zoom. I was very kind of tight-lipped about it, and I still don't talk a lot about it because I'm still grappling with it myself. Like, what does it mean? And was the thing that has been the hardest for me to kind of come to grips with is I wanted so deeply to have this job. I wanted so deeply to have this experience. And the person that arrived into my family changed everything in ways that I was ready for and also ways that I was completely unprepared for, which is the way of any big change, I think. But I was so afraid that it would never happen that I'm almost afraid now to even say, well, this has happened and it's changed me because it feels too good to be true in certain ways. And it feels so. I had the systems that worked for me. I knew what a workday felt like. I knew how to flow with my chronic illness. I knew how to flow in my marriage. I knew how to flow being a self-employed person. And all of that beautifully and horrifically exploded
Yeah.
in February
I hear that.
2024. And there is the skill that I have had to really lean into. I thought I was going to need to lead into my strategic thinking, like my planning and my organization, and what I needed to really, what I've gotten a crash course in developing is my self-trust. Trusting that one bad morning's not going to derail my entire relationship with my
Yeah.
husband and my child and my business, or that one bad launch isn't going to happen, or that like people unsubscribing from my newsletter isn't going to wreck things. I've had to be able to be like, okay, you're going to fail most days at something. And can you develop the inner compass that is going to keep you moving in the directions that you want to move? Because if I remember telling a therapist when I was like 8 months pregnant, I was like, I just don't think I'm going to fall prey to like parenting blogs. I was like, because like I'm a media scholar. So I'm gonna be able to like be like research developed, and I'm not gonna be sensitive to it. And like playground conversations have really knocked me on my behind in terms of like comparing myself with other people. And it's been in the same ways that I had to decouple my identity as an academic away from the things I produce as an academic. I've really had to decouple my identity as a parent away from the behavior of my child, away from the success I'm having in my business. Like they're related, but they're not the same. And that's so hard. I'm still
That
on
is
the floor
hard.
crying about it more or less monthly because um it's the work of it for me in this particular season.
Yeah. I can't even add to that because I feel like you said it so beautifully. And that is the work of parenting. And what people don't realize is that a lot of the work of parenthood is actually on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we think it's all these schedules and all of this, like you said, going on these blogs and having the perfect organization routine and morning routine and nighttime routine, and it all goes to plan and it all works out. And the reality of it is that we need to detach ourselves from that perfectionist kind of thinking about motherhood. And the real work is on ourselves, detaching our identities from the outputs of whether that's scholarly work or kids.
Yeah, it's so it's I was blessed with a son that just like would not sleep through the night. He just was not a sleeper. He still is pretty touch and go about sleeping. And I remember saying to somebody before, I was like, you know what? I'm going to be good as soon as I can get like 4 hours in a row. And I did not consistently get 4-hour chunks of sleep until he was like 14 or 15 months old.
Yeah.
And when I was really lucky and privileged to be able to take like 18 months off of my business. And I came back when he was just about a year and a half. And I remember being like, okay, I'm just going to hit it. I'm going to get that newsletter going. I'm going to get the podcast. I'm going to do the thing. And I was so profoundly tired and still am that I couldn't, for the first time in my life, I couldn't do it. I
Yeah.
would sit down and it just didn't happen. And it was so humbling, but it was so freeing because like I didn't have the experience yet of rebuilding from such a low level. I'd had a couple of towers, you know what I mean? Like my life was a Jenga tower, I'd lost the top third or I'd lost
But not starting from scratch.
I'd lost some Jenga towers there in the middle, but like I'd never had it so completely leveled. And once I was like, okay, well, you're not going to get it back, but you can rebuild it again. And is in the same way of like, I just had to be like, okay, you can rebuild it again. In the same way that I tell my son all the time, like, okay, let's try again. And it's frustrating for him and it's frustrating for me, but it's survivable. And sometimes we don't know that something's survivable until we're asked to survive it.
So true. So true. You've given me flashbacks of my last pregnancy, coming back from maternity leave to finish my thesis and just feeling completely out of my depth and completely overwhelmed and just questioning the whole thing and thinking, how on earth am I going to get this thing done? And yeah, I think there's a little part of that is the planning and the organizing, particularly from a work perspective. But I think from, the parenting perspective, it's really just setting those expectations so low, so low that you are, like you said, yes, you're building from a low place, but one brick at a time is how you get there. And realizing that don't worry about the person next to you who's building at a faster rate. Don't worry about, the person who's not even lost a block, right? Just focus on your own race, focus on your own journey. And, your child will teach you what the pace needs to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about success, because this is a word that I feel I've got like very strange relationship with. My observation is that academia can have a really particular and sometimes narrow definition of what success could look like. I don't know, maybe you agree, maybe you don't agree, but how do you help people figure out what success means to them, particularly when they are inside a system that quite often predefines success for them?
Yeah. So there's one of the moments where people most often come to work with me is when they are about a year away from finishing the PhD and starting to think through the next steps. And the exercise that I do almost to a person with everyone is I have them make a list of all of the things that they would like their future life to give them access to. So, for example, my list was I wanted to live in the house where my husband lived after I graduated. Like I wanted to sleep in the bed that my husband was also sleeping in. I think I even was like, I'm flexible, like 5 nights a week, maybe. But just say I would like to be in the place where he lives. And for other people, it's like I would like to always be available for pickup and drop off, or I would always like to be within an hour of my parents because they're getting older and I want to be part of their lives as that happens. Or I need to be in a place that's going to support my work. And I'm willing to go wherever it is to do that because that's my non-negotiable. But we start from that non-negotiable and work backwards because my non-negotiable was I wanted to be in this place. And so I optimized for that. And it meant that I had a variety of very strange jobs, and now I'm self-employed. And there's definitely some like drawbacks to being self-employed. Like it's tough to be the boss and the worker at the same time. But it optimizes for the kind of non-negotiable in my life right now, which is if my son is sick or if he needs something, I want to be able to have the flexibility to accommodate that. And that does mean that I've had to turn down job offers for places that were because it didn't hit that criteria. And it's not that non-negotiable can never change, but the people who I find that are genuinely unfulfilled are the ones that have either not decided what their non-negotiables are, or they've let somebody, some system, some person, some outside context push them past where they were comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And so many of us grew up in this idea that like, oh, you just got to get your dream job. Like what's your dream job? And if you just get this one puzzle piece, everything else will fall into place. But my data is that if you decide what that one puzzle piece is, location or schedule or capacity or support or sort of whatever yours is, it's so much easier to get the rest of the puzzle to fall into place. And that sometimes means that it's not going to be an academic job that fits it, or it's not going to be that the long term, or it's going to be, contract based instead of long term, or it's going to be, transitional, or it's going to be in the office and not that other place. But if it's your puzzle, it's always going to feel better than somebody else's puzzle. So I don't know how useful that is, but that strategy is the one that I find saves a lot of time realigning. And I think that a lot of the time when we hit these kind of crisis moments, it's like, okay, like either that non-negotiable has changed and my life's not fitting it anymore, or I have drifted away I've started negotiating my non-negotiable.
Yeah. So true. And I think, when you start from a place of not having thought through what those non-negotiables are, not having thought through actually what do I want? What do I want my life to look like? It's really hard then to design that life because you don't have a vision of what you're aiming for, what you're working toward. And I always think that the strongest motivator, particularly on a PhD journey, is working towards your definition of success. Yeah. Working towards your own definition of success, which may not look like the typical academic definition of success. But that's your motivation. Yeah. Your motivation is what's going to get you through this, not necessarily the expectations of the people around you. So it's really important to get clear on what that is and accept that there's going to be seasons where you may drift a little bit from. But it's about recentering yourself, recalibrating yourself, and getting back to that vision of what you want.
Yeah. I think the thing that becomes more and more true is that it's rarely static, that jobs are changing so fast and cultures and like we're changing so fast. I think a lot of us have this idea that these things are problems that we solve one time. We get the job because maybe that's how our parents lived, or that's what we were told, or it's how our advisors had. Like I was at a department of people that like had never been through the job market in any meaningful way. So I was like, listen, your advice is less valuable to me because you actually haven't lived this in this particular way. And it doesn't mean that you're not well-meaning. It just means that you're giving me advice for a problem that I'm not trying to solve. And that was a really hard lesson for like, I was I wanted to be good. I wanted to be good at school. I wanted to meet the expectations of my advisors. And then I realized I was like, okay, am I willing to give up on my most valued moral compass, my most valued important things in my life so that this person who I've known for 4 years will not be disappointed in me?
Yeah, exactly.
And it seems so silly when you phrase it that way, but when everyone else is operating under that same condition, it's really hard to be like, yes, I will actually disappoint this person.
And this is a thing. Like when you are on a PhD journey, or even if you're in a post PhD journey, like we seem to feel that we have to make decisions, lifelong decisions, for while we're just in a season of our lives. Like this PhD is a season. This fellowship, postdoctoral fellowship that you're on is a season. This job you're in, it's a season. Like these are seasons. And I think often we misinterpret these for eternity. And we think that, the decisions that we make, that potentially that we made 5-10 years ago need to be the standard that we live by today. And that's just not the case. It's just not how life works.
No, I work with so many people who, and I understand why it happens because the expectations are so high and they're getting higher all of the time. There is literally always something you could be doing more in academia. It's just that's the baseline, that none of us are doing all of it. None of us are even doing most of it. So you can't even go to the rational part of your brain because there's empirical evidence that you're not doing enough.
Yeah.
As the baseline.
Yeah.
But there is this sense that because there's so much that we need to achieve and the pathway is so narrow that you have no space to experiment, to do something that isn't going to be 100% more effective. And I work with so many people who are like, okay, well, if these are the scholars that I cite in this paper that puts me into this subfield, which is going to be less desirable in the job market, which means that I'm going to have to move to this other place. And so they freeze because they're worried about decisions, probable decisions that they are not making right now that are 5, 10, 15 years ahead of time. Yeah. And they're putting all of that weight on one paragraph about who to cite. Who wouldn't turn to dust in a situation like that?
Absolutely.
And the reality that I have come to sort of know and understand is that the more you can trust yourself to adjust the pathways and be like, this is what I did, but this is not what I'm doing now. But here is me explaining the through line between what I researched and how it shifted. That you can make up for a lot of quote unquote inefficiency by being aware of those decisions and making them on purpose and being able to explain them back to people. So that if this nightmare scenario happens where you're on a job talk and somebody asks why you abandoned this thread of research that you used to do 6 or 7 years ago, if you made those decisions on purpose, it's so much easier to say, well, here are the steps A, B, and C. And people are more than happy to accept that 97% of the time because everyone is making those changes. The people who have those kind of unshakable 15-year plans, in my experience, are either so wildly supported that that's all they can focus on. They have the privilege of only focusing on executing that plan.
Yeah.
Or they're being very loose with how that plan is being applied.
And that very, very true.
And it's so hard to know that from the outside because it looks like they're zooming or they're fast or they're just executing it step by step by step and that you'll never catch up because you're weaving.
There's a book that I really enjoyed reading by Dr. Anne Lure de Caff. It's called Tiny Experiment. And we actually did our PhDs at the same university, we found out recently. And she really opens our minds in that book around this idea of pacts and, just setting intentions rather than these hard, fast goals that are immovable and unshakable. And it's something that I've really adopted in my own life because I feel like it has relieved that pressure of these fixed plans and trajectories that just are not friendly to the realities of life that we deal with as mother scholars. And the unpredictability of that, and also the fact that we grow, we evolve, we change, we want different things, we're in different seasons of our lives. And so I think what I've learned from reading that book is it's more important to learn the skill of being able to experiment, being able to try something for a set amount of time, rather than the previous way of setting these really ambitious goals that don't always adapt to the changing narrative of our lives and our stories as they evolve. And so it's been a really nice way of reframing intention and being gentle when things don't work out, when seasons change, when things change, when context changes. So rather than just kind of thinking about the changing of the goals,
Right.
think more about learning the skill of experimenting with different things. I think that's been so helpful for me.
Oh, the book is a game changer, and I think about it often. And one of the things that I really took from it is that no data is uninformative.
Exactly.
And so I am a big believer in kind of trying things out because deep down, I want to make data-driven decisions, right? I don't want to just be throwing spaghetti at the wall. I don't have time for it. So I would like to be making decisions based on data. But I can't fight the data either. And I think that's the part that I really took away from that book that was like, okay, and I am more than happy to share that. Like, I really wanted to do like 100 days of journaling where I was like, I'm going to get up and I'm going to do morning pages. Like, my brain is so busy. I want to practice writing. And at first I was like, I'm going to do 100 days of morning pages. And then that very quickly got revised down to I'm going to try and do morning pages for 2 weeks. And then when I managed to do morning pages 3 times in 2 weeks, and they were only ever like a paragraph instead of like the full long-handed writing, it was earlier versions of me would have been like, what a failure. Like, I can't believe that I couldn't do that. It's only 3 pages. Other people find this so useful. Why didn't it work for me? And that book and sort of like other experiences in my life have given me the permission to be like, wow, that's really good data. And one of them is it's really hard to do something first thing in the morning when you have a baby that needs breakfast.
Or you haven't slept.
Yeah, and you haven't slept and your brain is just like, my morning page for today is just like, and that there's some value, if not a lot of value, in learning what things don't work for you. And so now I have a 1 line a day journal because what I realized is that I wanted to capture these mini moments of my family as it was growing and changing. And what I can't do 3 longhand pages, but I can do 1 line a day.
Oh, I love that.
And I've managed to stay with that for a year, which was so much more than I was ever able to do. And it meets the same goal. And that, I think, is the sort of lesson that I really want to like hold on to in this season of my life is that there's multiple solutions available to me. And if the first one doesn't work, that's good data for how to readjust for a try 2.
Absolutely.
Or 3
Absolutely.
or 4. Because I'm not out here nailing it on the first try.
Absolutely not. None of us are. None of us are. Let's be real about that. Yeah. None of us are. So one of the things that I am listening to you and that I'm hearing coming through is partly about this relationship with failure, where we set an intention, we say we're going to do something, and for whatever reason, it doesn't work out. And of course, we've talked about the fact that with the experimental mindset, that's okay because that's data, that's information, right? You can readjust, you can tweak. But for a lot of people, that means failure. And so, someone listening to this who feels like they're failing by academia's metrics, about success that we talked about, who feels that they're failing, what would you want them to hear? What would you want to share with that person?
I would want to hear what I needed to hear at that point in my PhD. And I needed to hear that this thing that I had built my life around avoiding in so many ways, I had built everything about myself toward the single goal of not failing.
Yeah.
Was that failing was survivable.
Yes.
And that I knew that intellectually, like I knew because I taught it to my students, I taught it to my friends. I knew it, but I didn't. There was such a big difference between knowing something intellectually and understanding it through experience. And it was only through the kind of smaller failures of my PhD, not getting the grade that I wanted in a class, or like having that journal piece rejected, or needing to do this again, or not meeting that deadline, that I realized that failure is survivable, and that through it opened up so much more space laterally, because I felt like I was always on this tightrope and that any little thing was going to tip me. And once I fell off, I realized I could walk on the balance beam, or I could walk on the path, or I could walk on the beach even. There was more space if I was willing to tolerate that discomfort. And I didn't like it. I still don't like it. I don't cheer for myself. We're working on the self-compassion part, but um, I don't have to like it to survive it.
Yeah. And I think it kind of takes us back a little bit to what you said early on in the beginning, which is, as people who are scholarly, we got to this place through curiosity. And when we stay curious and we stay in that lane of, what is this trying to teach me? What am I learning here? Where's the lesson here? What's the data telling me here? Then failure is just information, isn't it?
It's the more curious I am, the more I can see the possibilities.
Yeah.
And it's when I let the pressure and sort of my own inner perfectionist narrow my focus that I can't see them anymore. And I always think of curiosity as sort of this thing that just like expands my field of view.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that there won't be hard things that happen. It doesn't mean that there won't be things that I wanted that I don't get. But I'll be able to see more than just this binary thing of, did I do it or not? Was I good at it or not? Did it get done or not? So small.
Yeah, I love that. Oh my gosh, I love. So we are near the end of our chat together, but I wanted to ask you about Thrive PhD. I know you've built this. We talked about your kind of motivation for wanting to create a space where people can become more human, but still thrive in their work. In fact, thrive in their work through becoming more human. And so I wanted to ask you, why did you build this community? What was the impetus to do so?
I felt so lonely during my PhD.
Yeah.
I didn't have a lot of social support in my family. My cohort was really small. I later gained some friends and stuff, but I felt all of the places that were available to support me had a really high cost in some way or another. That they were really expensive, they were really public and people would find out about it. They required me to disclose a lot of vulnerability that I wasn't always comfortable with. I would have to I remember thinking about okay, I could open up to my advisor about the fact that I'm chronically ill and I have these things, but I would have to give up so much of my medical privacy
Yeah.
for such an unsure return
Yes.
in terms of what support I would get, that I really wanted for there to be a place where people could come back to it. Because there were a lot of places that would take you from point A to point B, write your prospectus from here to here, or go on, write your lit review from here to here, or publish your first thing from here to here. And I wanted there to be a place where you could start your day with it, you could end your day with it, you could be really busy for a month and then you could come back to it. And it was only $5. So it didn't it wasn't nothing, but it didn't bankrupt you to not wring every penny out of it. And I wanted it to be a place where, as silly as it is, you didn't have to use your university email if you didn't want to. And you didn't have to tell people anything that you didn't want them to know. You could show up as the version of yourself that needed support. And so that's why I built it in places where you didn't have to have a Twitter login, or it wasn't tied to your LinkedIn, or you could control how you showed up so that you could arrive as the version that needed the support.
Yeah.
And it is my grand experiment. I'm always kind of tweaking it. I'm always kind of adjusting it. But the thing that has stayed really steady is that there is this behavior of there's no wrong or right way to do it. I have some people that basically keep it open in a tab all day, and they're in the chat room and they're in the work togethers and they're commenting on every post. And I love that. And I have other people who log in once every 2 months and they watch every video and then they log right back out again.
Yeah.
And both of those are such successful use cases to me. And it's the place that lifts me up when I need it. When I arrive dragging to a work together and I'm listen, friends, if you see me dump a bowl of dry cereal directly into my mouth on this work together, I just ask that you kindly mind your business because I'm so tired. I'm so tired. But I found that in exchange for a little bit of vulnerability, I have gotten so much support. And I've seen that exchange happen on so many levels between so many people. And it makes it a joy to use. It makes it a joy to run. I'm proud of it.
You should be. I think, again, we all have this. I think one of the things that we do have in common is the work is bigger than us, and we talked about purpose, but this is purposeful work too, and being able to share and help from a place of lived experience, from a place of I've been there. If you're falling apart, I kind of know what that feels like.
Yeah.
I don't know every scenario and every circumstance. Everybody's journey is different, but there's a safe space here where you can relate to other people who are also navigating that journey.
And that's what your podcast was for me. I remember being in that sort of freshly postpartum haze. And like I said, he wasn't sleeping. So I had some time to walk around the neighborhood. And I just remember being I can't be the only one who's been I can't do all of this all of the time. And I think the ability to learn from people, to have people who are willing and in a place to exchange a little bit of what they know.
Yeah.
It's so profoundly generous. And I benefit from it and your work.
Oh, thank you, Katy. That's very kind. Thank you. So where can my lovely listeners find you online?
The best way to find me is probably on Instagram. I only have the bandwidth for the one right now. So it's at Thrive PhD at Instagram. But the probably best way is to be on the newsletter. So I send a newsletter out every Thursday, give or take, toddler chaos withstanding. But that newsletter has all of the ways to kind of work with me. But I try really hard to make it so that it's something that is worth the space in your inbox.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it usually has a picture of one of the cats. So
Did you notice actually during this call, there was one popping in and out?
Yeah.
But you did warn us. You did warn us that was going to happen.
Yeah.
It's been so good. It's been so lovely to have you on the podcast, to learn more about your journey. I know we've obviously spoken before, but it's really nice to be able to share that with all of my listeners and for them to realize that they're not alone. Like, we've been through this journey. We're still navigating this journey, right?
Yeah.
We're still becoming.
Right.
And so, you're not alone. There are spaces out there that you can tap into, and communities and services that you can tap into to help. And so, and also you've got a podcast as well, by the way.
I do. The podcast is on its way to rebecoming. So,
yes, we love it.
Yes, it is the thing I give myself permission to take off the list when the alarm goes off 40 minutes before I have to leave to get the baby from school. So, but I believe in the future that it will be there. But the back episodes are there and it's good. So it's called Grad School is Hard, But.
Love that. Love that. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If something in today's conversation resonated with you, I want you to know this. You don't need to have it all figured out before you take your next step. This work is all about learning to lead yourself first in ways that honor your capacity, your work, your home, and yourself without burning out in the process. If you'd like to continue the conversation beyond the podcast, you're warmly invited to join Scholarly Mamas The Letter, a quiet monthly newsletter for mother scholars who value purpose beyond titles, presence at home, and peace within. You can sign up at scholarlymamas.com. And if you're feeling stuck, stretched, or just not where you want to be, you can book a free 30-minute call to help you gain clarity and explore what support might look like in this season to get from where you are to where you want to be. You can also connect with me on social media at Mrs. Mummy PhD, where I share reflections on ambition, motherhood, sustainable self-leadership, all the things, for high-achieving mamas like yourself. This, mama, is the quiet work of scholarly motherhood, and these are our journeys of becoming.